Tonight's guest speaker is Irene Stern Frielich, who will give a multimedia presentation based on her memoir, Shattered Stars, Healing Hearts, Unraveling My Father's Holocaust Survival Story. The book was a BookFest Gold Award winner and won many other distinguished awards as well. Irene is the daughter-in-law of Max Frielich, one of our members, and he's sitting right here with us. And she resides in Massachusetts, Sharon, Massachusetts, with her husband and adult children. And she came all the way here to speak with us today. And I believe we have another guest here with her too. After the presentation, Irene will be available for questions, for book signing, if you wish to purchase a book, or there's some artifacts if you wish to look at those as well. And now I'd like to turn the program over to Irene.
Thank you, Rhoda. Hi, Max. It's really nice to be in my father-in-law's community. I appreciate that. And thank you all for having me here tonight and for coming out. Today's actually a really important day on the Jewish calendar. I don't know if you know, it is the end of the day called Yom HaShoah, which means the day of remembering the Holocaust. So a lot of activities are planned during this week in commemoration of the Holocaust. And it's kind of timely that I'm here tonight to share with you my father's story. So my father, Walter Stern, he was a Holocaust survivor, but that wasn't talked about very much in my home growing up. And as is the case for many children of survivors, I lived most of my life holding secrets I didn't exactly know about. There was just an undercurrent of not talking about it in my household. That's very common for many children of Holocaust survivors, whereas other Holocaust survivors talk about it incessantly. So you get one extreme or the other. But pretty much all I knew was that my dad had escaped Germany with his family on Kristallnacht, which I will talk about in a moment, at the age of 12. And he survived in hiding on a farm somewhere in Holland or the Netherlands. Those are interchangeable for purposes of this story. I also knew that he painted this brooch. It's about this big, an inch and a half in diameter, painted on wood. And I knew that he painted that while he was in hiding on the Lansing farm. So these are the little details I did know. He gave me this brooch when I was about 10 years old, and I knew it was special, but I didn't understand the story behind it, not at that point anyway. Now, my father died in 1994, over 30 years ago, and shortly before his death, he privately made what is called a testimony video. How many of you have heard of these things called testimony videos? A few of you. So these are videos that Holocaust survivors often made that often are also available publicly through places like like the Shoah Foundation at the USC. My father's, however, was private, so it was not stored anywhere. It was simply given to my brother and me. So this video came to me shortly after my father's death. So I watched it once, I put it away because I couldn't really understand the chronology that he shared. I didn't understand the names of the places he said. This was back in 1994, so you may remember that there wasn't much of an internet back then, so I couldn't just look it up on Google Maps. And so I put the video away. My father being gone, I couldn't ask all these questions that I had. It was too late for me to ask those questions. But in 2017, I took the video out again. It was on VHS. Remember VHS? I had to have it converted to a DVD so I could actually watch it. And I meticulously transcribed word for word every word that he said in the way that he said it with his German accent. And that was very emotional for me. But this time, I could Google the places he said, and I could start piecing together a little bit of his story in a way that made sense to me. I also was able to pull out some of the documents and photos I had saved from after he died and piece together more about my family's story. So I got very excited. My husband calls it obsessed, but I'll just stick with it. No, it was obsessed. I was obsessed to retrace my family's background and story and to retrace my father's footsteps. So in 2018, with my husband Seth, our oldest son Josh, we went to Germany and the Netherlands for the first of 3 times within a year to retrace my father's steps. And that's what I did. We went to the border crossing, we went to his hiding place, and what I would like to do is take you on that journey with my father and me as he escapes Nazi Germany and survives ultimately in hiding in the Netherlands. And we're going to see some of the locations where 18 people, most of whom I know by name, actually helped my family to survive. These are the upstanders to my family. These are the people who did something. They acted. They put their lives and their livelihoods at risk to do what they felt was the right thing. Upstanders, that's the term we use for them. So let me introduce you to my family. On the bottom is Walter, my father, at probably the age of 11, give or take. And his parents were Moritz and Hilda. Now, Hilda was my Oma, my grandmother. I knew her well. No spoiler alert, but there's a spoiler alert. She's the only one I knew other than my father. So Oma's parents were Sally, who died when she was a baby, and Selma, who will be in our story. And Selma remarried a man named Edward, and they had a son named Kurt. So Kurt is my Uncle Kurt, okay? So these are the people who will be in our story. And these are the places we're going to visit. Some people love maps, so I've included a map. And what you'll see is Bocholt, in red at the bottom, is the German town where my father was born. And all the other towns that we will be in are across that green line, which is the border with the Netherlands. So thankfully, my family lived on the border with the Netherlands. Otherwise, they probably would not have made it. So in 1902, my great-grandmother Selma is already living in this town of Bocholt, Germany. And here she is with her daughter, my grandmother Hilda. And Selma's soon-to-be second husband, Edward, arrives in 1910 and marries Selma soon after that. And he sets up a clothing store named, creatively, his last name, Hertzfeld. So this is their store on the bottom floor, and they're living in the top 2 floors of this building. And these are actual photos that I have that I took from my father's things. These are our family photos. Now, by 1926, my grandfather Moritz comes to Bocholt to run the Hertzfeld store. He becomes a partner in the business. And he marries my Oma, and they have my father 9 months later. I like to joke, I'm not sure what came first, the business partnership or love, but at any rate, it all happened at about the same time. And there's my dad in the baby carriage with his little head sticking out of the baby carriage. I don't know if you can make that out. Now, they live just 1 block away from the town hall, and this is what that town hall looked like in the early 1930s. This photo I got from the Bocholt Archives Facebook page, where there are a lot of old photos, and I wouldn't say enjoyed going through them, but there are some very painful and interesting photos on that Facebook page. Now, what's important to understand is life in Germany for Jews at this point of time was very good compared to the rest of Eastern Europe, right? Jews could live independent lives and have successful businesses, as my family did. They were full German citizens. They expected a decent, if not a good and happy future. But we all know in 1933, Hitler came into power, and he immediately declares a national boycott of Jewish businesses. So now it becomes dangerous for people to come into Jewish-owned stores, and it becomes very difficult for Jews to own businesses and make a living. On April 1st, 1933, the windows of my family's store were shattered for the first of many times. Now, this photo is not my family's store, it's just from the internet. But when I think about these windows that are large plate glass windows being shattered, I think about the noise that must have created, right? Very loud, very jarring, to say the least. And this is the sound that my father would be hearing from the time he was a young boy. Imagine living life like that. So my family's customers did begin fearing coming to the store. But Moritz, a very smart man, I'm just amazed by him, he decides to bike to the customers to take their orders and deliver the goods. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But I wanted to share with you this picture that I found on the Bocholt Archives Facebook page of that same town hall a few years later into the mid to late 1930s. And on top of the building, it says, Ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer, which means one land, one people, one dictator, which is the definition of a fascist government. This was their slogan. And my father, at the age of 8, 9, and 10, would have to walk between these two buildings, the other one having a big picture of Hitler on it, to get to school each day. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws go into effect. Who has heard of the Nuremberg laws? Anybody? A lot of you. Not everybody, though. So these are race-based laws that, among other things, define who is a Jew. It actually defined how you identify who is a Jew. It's kind of sick. It's very sick. And among many restrictions placed on Jews, the laws prohibit intermarriage, which had been very common in Germany at the time, but now it's illegal at the time. They stripped Jews of their German citizenship. So these Jewish people who thought they'd be fine as citizens of the country of Germany no longer are citizens. And it also restricts employment. So here's another photo, this one from the 1930s, of one of the streets near my father's home. And as my father walks down these streets as a child, he shares in his testimony video that kids would spit at him, they would throw rocks at him, and they would call him Dirty Jew. And he's not allowed to retaliate in any way because there was fear that his father would be sent off to a concentration camp, which did exist as early as 1933. So this sweet-looking boy, my dad, next to his mom, holding the cherry blossoms at their cherry tree in their garden, he is so traumatized that he needs sedatives to calm him. Now, my grandfather Moritz, seated on the right side, he expects things to worsen. He knew things were getting bad for Jewish people in Germany, and he makes plans to protect the family. Now, remember, I didn't know these details, really, until I listened to my father's testimony video. This was when I first really got a little inkling of what he went through. And so I'd like to have my dad here with us today help tell part of the story.
My mother was smart with his own money. We followed on weekends on the bicycle. He removed the saddle, and he had a rubber tube filled with money, and he slid it all the way down into the tube of the bicycle.
Right? Isn't that ingenious? And so what you see here is a Google Map blue line. This is the approximate 7-mile ride my husband and I recreated from Bocholt to this town of Alton to see what that bike ride might have been like.
And we were riding to go and a nice Sunday afternoon, and he would go to see this particular rabbi, and he would have a special rod there in the house with a hook on it, and pull the money out again. And the rabbi would then the next day deposit that money for us in the Dutch not know about it. We were not supposed to know about it, just in case somebody would get caught. Nobody would know about it, would talk about it.
So it took me about 5 years of doing these presentations to finally hit me this idea of secrets in a family, right? I lived growing up with secrets. I knew there were secrets, I just didn't know what they were. Well, my father also grew up with secrets that he eventually found out, but secrets just pervade our family like they do many other families. So this is Seth and me visiting this town of Alton, standing in front of the synagogue, which is next to the building that used to be the rabbi's home. And if you look really carefully, you can see up between the windows, there's a Jewish star in blue brick. It's still there, so that was not removed, it was not painted over, even though Jewish people, there are no Jewish people left in Alton, except for one man. But even though Jewish people aren't living in this home, they left that as a tribute to the Jews of the town and to the rabbi. So back in Bocholt, it is November 9th, 1938, and my father's birthday is the next day. He's turning 12 years old. And this is what the family unit, this is the family unit and approximately what they looked like at that time, give or take a year or two. Now let's hear what happens on the night of November 9th to 10th. It is a violent night, one that will become known as Kristallnacht, which literally means the night of broken glass. In Germany, they call it differently. They call it the Reichspogromsnacht, which means the state pogrom night. You know what pogroms are from hearing about them in Eastern Europe. It's violence against Jews, and that's what it was. It was a pogrom. But we call it Kristallnacht here. It's also the night that the Stern family, and Sterne in German means stars, was shattered. And that's where I took my book title and my presentation title from, Shattered Stars, Sterne. Dad?
There were numerous green and brown uniforms on the street holding out steel I-beam and poking not only the windows, but also poking into the doors, the two house doors, this door, and a separate door for the private entrance today. Just demolish it so you could walk right into the house all the way through. It was so bad that the glass particles were in the clothing that were hanging in the store way in the rear. Nothing more was usable anymore. But it was loaded with gas. Then of course was a great shock to us, and then we heard also gunshots in the street. And now we knew that what it meant, they meant business. They really wanted to get rid of us. And in order to avoid any confrontation with these drunken people, whatever they were, animals, they sounded like animals. The sound was so shrill and loud, huge, and whenever they sat there, it was the hatred. You would hear the hatred, feel the hatred. And it was a vibration in the air. And my father directed us all to escape to the roof. He had always planned an escape route in many different ways.
Really an amazing man, right? So once on the rooftop, my family waits for things to quiet down. And that night, more than 7,500 Jewish-owned businesses are destroyed throughout Germany. 7,500. And that night, the crowd in Bocholt moves on to destroy the synagogue, which is just a 5-minute walk from my family's home. Across Germany, more than 267 synagogues are destroyed on that night, most of them burnt to the ground. On the left is a photo of the inside of the synagogue taken probably in 1927 by my Uncle Kurt, who was a photographer. This is my original photograph that I have, or my family has. This is actually hanging on a town site and they did not know that my uncle took this photograph. On the right is a photo of the synagogue in Bocholt on the morning after the destruction. You can see everything is strewn about, right? They took the Torah scrolls, which is the holiest object in our religion, ripped them and threw them on the street. There was kerosene poured on the Torah scrolls and around the floor of the synagogue. And the brown shirts were about to set fire to the kerosene. But why didn't they? Well, next door was a Nazi who owned a lumber supply company right next to the synagogue. And what would happen if the synagogue were burnt down? His business would go up in flames. So he ordered the brown shirts not to set the building on fire, and that's the only reason it was not burned down. It was later fully destroyed, but it was not burnt to the ground. Now, while the Bocholt synagogue is being destroyed, my family hides toward the rear of their building.
A neighbor in the rear, his name was Imping, and Imping was a keeper of horses for other people, race horses, etc. Also, he made a living with burning coffee, that is old-fashioned coffee burning machines. He had a large property, and my father was opening the window, standing on the lot of a small step ladder, and through the night was Imping, please help us. He got us down from our window by the ladder, and he was hiding us in his hayloft, and he also was providing us with a limousine rides to take us to the war. That is at the risk of his own life.
So Mr. Imping is the first of over 18 individuals who helped my family to survive, and the limo driver is the second. He's contacted by Mr. Imping to drive my family to the Dutch border. Now, I want to tell you that this Imping coffee shop of today is in the spot of this story. In fact, when we went back to visit this past November, I looked at the front door of this coffee shop building that is not, the front door that is not in use anymore, and it still has the Imping name plaque on it. I had not noticed that in previous visits. So there is evidence that the Impings had lived here. So the limo driver drops them at a spot that my grandfather directs him toward, according to his plan, just on the German side of the town in Holland called Mechelen. This is one of the reasons I couldn't understand what my father was saying, but it's a ch. Mechelen is the name of the town. It's written out down on the bottom. And this is what Mechelen looks like now. It's beautiful farmland. And we actually got this picture from Josh, who was 28 when he went on this trip with us, and he took his drone, because what 28-year-old doesn't bring their drone on a trip to Europe? I don't know. But I was happy that he took this picture, and I use it. And there's a lot of really good stuff in the book about the houses that we see in this picture that we didn't know would be important to us later. So I learned from my father's testimony video that my grandfather has a customer who owns a farm that's half in Holland and half in Germany. And Maritz's plan is to cross the border on the customer's farm from Germany into Holland, right? So that was some good clue for us to try to figure out exactly where is this place. And so the limo driver drops them near that box that you see on the German side of the border. Dad?
And there my father says, wait. And we were hiding in a ditch. There was a dry ditch, and it put our heads down anyway for the gendarme on the German side who was guarding the border there to go at 11:45 to take his bicycle, noontime, to go home for lunch. And at 12 o'clock, the new gendarme would arrive in order to guard this area.
So when we got to this area, we were surprised to see so many of these ditches along the border. I couldn't understand what my father meant by a dry ditch. I just imagined a little swell or underswell in the ground. But they had these deep ditches all along the border. And that's Josh, who jumped into one of the ditches to take some photos. And if I had taken a few steps further back, I wouldn't have been able to see him. On Thanksgiving morning, during my second trip, which was back in 2018, Josh and I decided to walk from Germany across the border in the spot that we later confirmed was the exact spot where my family crossed the border. That's where the yellow line is. And I took a video of myself walking this path. So I'm going to play that short video for you.
We're in Germany right now. That might have been the farmer's house where my family escaped on the day after Kristallnacht. And we're taking a path near that farm. And in one moment, we're going to be crossing the border into the Netherlands, as my family did 80 years ago this month, in this very cold weather, wearing only their pajamas and coats. And right now, I give Thanksgiving that we were able to be here.
I still get choked up hearing myself say that. I know exactly what happened, and I still get choked up. That was a monumental moment for me, among many. Crossing the border that we later confirmed was the exact crossing on Thanksgiving morning, on this very cold November morning where you could hear the wind blowing. You could hear it blowing. And I had my warm American coat on, keeping me warm on top of my other warm clothing. And my father and his family didn't have that. So this is Josh now just crossing over the border into Holland, looking over at that farmhouse. And in 1938, our family continues up this road for about a half a mile to this location, to a house owned by a baker named Jan Duking. Dad, can you describe the next part of the escape?
In Mechelen, there was a turnaround street. On the right-hand side, the Dutch police came. There were 3 of them and arrested us. On the right-hand side, the Dutch Marechaussee, which is like state troopers, state police, came and they wanted to arrest us. And the Dutch police said to the state troopers, no, they're under our jurisdiction, we got to them first, we are arresting them, they're in our custody. The state trooper says, you can't do that. The state is more important than your little town. He said, you don't have to take it over to the Congress, you have to take it over to the Queen. We have the law, and you, these people are in our custody, and over our dead body, you'll get these people.
So the local police, they win, and they place my family under house arrest for their own safety. They bring them to nearby Gendringen, which begins with the letter G, so it's pronounced Gendringen. And one of the reasons they are permitted to stay in Holland is they have money in Holland. Do you remember the money of my grandfather's own that he smuggled in on that bicycle? And this man named Harry Slager, he's a cousin of ours, he got the money from the rabbi and deposited it into a bank account. So my family had funds in a bank account in Holland. Also, Harry Slager allowed my family to come live with him. So my family had a place to go. They were not going to take up resources of the state, and that's one of the reasons they were permitted to stay. But let's hear more about that from my dad.
And we were gone by the local police. This was during a time of about 10 days, where every day my father would approach or go to the mayor in town. He had to report to him. So to prove that we were still there and did not escape. The mayor would try to legalize our stay in Holland. And of course, the Congress turned us down. We would have to be sent back to Germany. And the Senate, which was the Dutch Senate, a similar organization as here, was saying no, and sent us back. The Justice Department said no, they cannot stay, they will have to be sent back to Germany. Ultimately, they made an appeal to this dream girl, Mina, and she gave us a stay. All right, now police can say so. And she says, no, I can't send her to be confined.
Amazing set of stories, right? And there's so much more to tell about that I do write about, but how we got the police report, what the police report said, where my family stayed. But anyway, it turns out that a huge influx of German Jewish refugees crosses the border into Holland that month of November 1938, and for the months after that. They are fleeing what they know is going to be just terrible in Germany. And Queen Wilhelmina, she has to do something. So she sets up a refugee camp in the northern town of Westerbork, spelled with a W, Westerbork in Holland. Has anybody ever heard of Camp Westerbork? Okay, that will come back in our story. But my family is very fortunate in that they have means and they're able to live independently, so they don't need to go to the refugee camp. Now, after they receive their furniture and things from Germany, feel free to ask me about that later, my family moves from Groningen to another town in Holland where Harry Slogger lives. It's called Enschede. And a few months after that, on September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland and World War II begins. A couple of months after that, my father becomes a bar mitzvah in this beautiful synagogue in Enschede, which still exists today. This is my video of the inside of it. It is very beautiful. And my father's photo of it on the left from his visit there in 1991. So it's in use, but they only have services every 3 weeks on the Sabbath, and school groups come through all the time. So it also serves as a museum. In May of 1940, just 8 months after World War II had begun, Germany invades Holland, as well as France and Belgium. And Queen Wilhelmina has to leave the UK, and Holland capitulates. In 5 quick days, Holland falls to Germany. And within days of that, my grandfather Moritz and my uncle Kurt are arrested. And they are eventually sent to labor camps in Vichy, France. You all know what Vichy, France is, so it's the part of France that was not immediately occupied by Nazi Germany. But they were forced into labor in Vichy, France. And we have this drawing of my grandfather that is smuggled out from Camp Rivesaltes and somehow miraculously makes it to my Oma, my father, my great-grandmother, where they are living in Holland. And I have that up on the front table if you would like to get a closer look at it. It was drawn in colored pencil and is just beautiful. And of course, it makes my grandfather look a lot better than he probably did look. So that's okay. In January 1942, the final solution to the Jewish question is codified in a place called Wannsee in Germany. Now, although plans had already been in place to exterminate all the Jews, and the mass killings were already in place, this conference ensured that those in attendance were clear that they were expected to obey. And this is when Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination camps, where the mass killings in the gas chambers and crematoria started. That was the mark of the Holocaust. That's when the Holocaust really began in earnest, if you didn't think it already was. Now remember Camp Westerbork, the one that the Queen had set up as a refugee camp for the Jews who escaped? Well, shortly after the Wannsee Conference, Camp Westerbork is taken over by the Nazis. It had not been under their control before that, but now it becomes a transit camp from which about 97,000 out of 102,000 Jews in Holland would be shipped to their deaths. And you know, some people, including my father, say that the Dutch people were so wonderful to the Jews. They weren't, overall. As a percentage of the population, more Jews in Holland were murdered than in any other country in Europe. So I located the following information about my grandfather Moritz on the Yad Vashem website. Yad Vashem is a museum a Holocaust Memorial Museum, and a research center that's located in Israel, and they have amazing databases that I was able to tap into from the comfort of my home in Sharon. And here's what I learned. In Drancy, France, on August 31st, 1942, Moritz and over 1,000 people, including hundreds of French children, are herded onto a train. It is transport number 26, train 901-21. Destination, Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination camp, Poland. The rest of his family would not learn about Moritz's fate until well after the war. We know that Moritz was gassed immediately on arrival. But let's return to Holland. In April 1942, a few months before my grandfather was murdered, Jews in all of Holland are required to wear the yellow Jude star. Has everybody seen a star that looks something like this? I actually have my father's Jude star that I take with me to these presentations. It's very rare to see these days, and this might be a once-in-a-life opportunity for you to actually see an actual Jude star. And so afterwards, I invite you to come up to me, and you can hold this if you would like. It's kind of a sacred object to me. Now, you might notice that Jude is spelled J-O-O-D, and usually we see it as J-U-D-E. So J-U-D-E is the German spelling. This Jod is the Dutch spelling because it happened in Holland. Now, it turns out that a formerly Jewish-owned textile factory, which then became Nazi-run, had to create all of the stars for all of Holland, which they do in 3 days. And actually, the factory was a half-mile away from where my father was living at the time, in Enschede. Another amazing story. Anyway, the Nazis are rounding up Jews systematically now, and on October 3rd, 1942, expecting a roundup, my Oma accesses the well-connected underground and pays somebody they refer to as a smuggler to take her, her son, and her mother into hiding. Now, imagine this. My father is 15 years old. He rides one of the bicycles, and his mother, my Oma, hops on the luggage carrier on the back, you know, the little carrier that you might put books on, not very big. She sits on that. The smuggler rides the other bicycle, and my 70-year-old great-grandmother, Selma, hops on the luggage carrier of the other bicycle. Now, I like to say 70 then is not 70 now. So, you know, she was old back then to do something like this. So let's hear what happens next.
We're walking through the dark. We circumvented the guards that were placed at the end of town, and we came through the dirt roads used by the farmers. We finally arrived after an hour and a half of quest for right. We arrived on a farm, and we were brought indoors, and there was one son and another son, and the boss himself greeting us, and they were staring at us like we were from outer space, and not knowing what was going on really. And that night we were sleeping on the floor in the living room.
So they arrive on the Lansink farm in this little town called St. Isidorus Hruve. And that is their house, and that is farmer Lansink and his adult son. Now, before I started my research, I never dreamt I would be able to find any of these places, much less the farm where my father was hidden. But we were able to, and here we are under the white circle in June of 2018, joined by my brother and sister-in-law, looking at the renovated farmhouse from Josh's drone. I was so glad he brought it for this picture. In 1942, this structure was half home and half cow barn attached. And under the blue box is where my father, my Oma, and my great-grandmother hid, in the attic above the cow barn. So the family that now lives in this former Lansink home had been expecting us. Somebody arranged this for us. They invited us inside, and up the stairs towards the attic where my family had hidden. Here, we approached the area of the closet that my father suggested be built to hide the secret door to the attic. And then we entered the attic. Now, my family still needed a living quarter within the attic. So what did they do?
Later on, the next day, a carpenter and I helped the carpenter to build a hiding corner nook underneath the roof. It was a slanted roof with shingles, and they just timbered it off with a hay and the straw was on the other side, so we could make a nice little living quarter out of it, with a hot plate in it and a pail as a latrine and covered with a potato sack. People would go down 2 steps to our little nook.
So the original nook, or nook as my father endearingly calls it, it was a couple of steps further down than what you see in this picture, because this is after the house was renovated, right? But they didn't have a lot of headroom when they were hiding in their nook, which was most of the time. They couldn't stand up in it, for sure. One of the things my father does while in hiding is listens to the BBC on one of the 6 radios that is hidden with the Jews in the attic because radios are illegal. And my dad is going to describe to us something he heard. Be aware, this is graphic. This is the most graphic part of what you'll hear tonight.
Fish would tell us what was over the radio. And I just, it hit me like a shock, and I could see my father burning in the oven. I could see, oh, this is just imagination, you're young. At the time I was 17 years of age, 16, 17 years of age. I did not tell my mother or my grandmother what I heard. I just left it alone. I just digested it for myself. I had to digest it for a while.
So imagine this teenager trying to protect his mother and grandmother from this awful truth and keeping this secret to himself. Now, we know he was right. His father had been killed in Auschwitz in September of 1942. Now, in the picture on the right are my brother and me embracing in the attic outside that little nook. And I know my father was with us there, as I think he is with us right now. So let me ask you this. When you're isolated, you're unable to be with friends, you can't go outdoors, there are no electronics except for an illegal radio. What do you do to pass the time? Well, my father does some chores. He does butter churning for the farmer. He does crafts, such as painting wooden brooches, like the one that I have. It's the only one I know about that has survived, but he painted many of these. And my son Josh made these replica tokens that you see on the right that we used as our trip symbol. And we actually left one at each of the direct ancestral graves that we visited in Germany. There were 16 of them, direct ancestors that we were able to visit and leave one of these tokens at. And I have these also up on the table. Now, Farmer Jan Lansink, or the boss, as my father calls him, he risks his life and the lives of his grown children, and yet they choose to hide my family and 3 other Jewish people, plus 17 others, conscientious objectors and the like. My dad shared in his testimony video that there were 6 close call stories, and I'm going to share one of them with you. This is the only story he told to my husband and me, probably within the year of his own death. So one summer day, it's just too hot in the attic, and my father says, I heard boots, army boots, coming up the stairs. My mother and grandmother, he says, were sitting in a bedroom upstairs, knitting at an open window. And I did not have enough time to get them into the attic because they were sitting 2 bedrooms down. I quickly took the pail of the latrine into the nook. I closed the closet door and I closed my door. I locked it up. I just heard them now speak to my mother, he continues. And my mother was answering him and they disappeared again. And then my mother and my grandmother quickly came running to the nook. They knocked on the door. I opened it. I let them in. I locked up again. and they were pale in their face like a sheet. What did happen? Well, the tall policeman was standing in the bedroom doorway, looking at the two women in the bedroom and blocking the view of the short policeman who was standing behind him. And the women, my grandmother and great-grandmother, could see the hat of the short policeman going over the shoulder of the tall policeman, trying to see what was going on, but he couldn't see. And the tall policeman says to the short one, "It's the farmer's wife. She's getting ready for bed. She's not decent. Please don't look." And they turned around and walked away. My father goes on to share that the tall policeman was a member of the Dutch underground who distributed food coupons to hiding Jewish people. And he knew that Jews were hidden on this farm, and that's why he came out with that short policeman. Amazing story. And due to the strong resistance in this area, 38% of the Jews hiding this region survive. And that's compared with under 20% in the Amsterdam region, which is really usually where we hear the stories from. 38% isn't a very high percentage, but it was twice as many as in the city of Amsterdam. I feel it really my obligation to mention some of the other men who were involved in the resistance and helped my family. One man is Gerard Sanders and another Zig Menko. Both were Jewish. Mr. Menko was the leader of the Jewish Council in Enschede, which was an amazing group. The one in Enschede saved a lot of Jews. And also Mr. Van Dam, who's not pictured, was another person instrumental with these men. Another member of the resistance was the Protestant Reverend Leendert Overdam. He found the safe addresses. My father mentioned him many times on his video. Before we get to Liberation Day, you might be wondering how I located the former Lansing farm. It's a bit of a story, but it ends with me being, I will say, reconnected with this man. This man is Jan, also Jan, they're all Jan, Lansing. His father and grandfather were the people who hid my father. And my father knew this Jan Jr. My father had known him when he visited in 1991, and somehow we were reconnected. And I feel such a bond with Jan Jr., like we were meant to be together. Now, let's resume with Liberation Day. Back on the farm, on April 1st, 1945, Allied soldiers arrived to the Lansing farm. Liberation at last. Dad?
We came out to the Ashland. The Canadian soldier said to my mother, he said, "You know, the button came off my pants. Can you sew it?" And it was like a bracelet. She was smiling and enjoying every moment of it, and she sewed the button on.
That is the best story in my father's whole testimony video, obviously, but especially because I get to hear him laugh, which was not a common occurrence in my house. The rest of Holland is liberated about a month later on May 4th to 5th, and my great-grandmother is very ill. And she dies on May 7th, 1945, and is buried in a Jewish cemetery nearby the farm. So here are my brother and I visiting her gravestone, leaving one of those tokens for her. And I think I forgot to tell you what it says on the tokens. I should have done that in the very beginning. On the tokens, there's some Hebrew writing that says, in Hebrew, Tikvat Yisrael, which means hope of Israel. And what that demonstrates to me is that even before Israel became a state, my father had this hope that the people of Israel, the Jews, would survive. And this is a timeless theme that us Jews have, that we will survive when bad things get thrown at us. So we left one of those tokens at my great-grandmother's grave. And she doesn't live to see the end of World War II in Europe, which is declared the following day on May 8th with Germany's surrender. My Oma and father moved back to Enschede in 1945 with the help of Farmer Lansing. And in 1946, my Oma receives this letter explaining that her husband, Marit Stern, was deported to Drancy to his death in Auschwitz. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that I ask every group. Do you know how many people were murdered in the Holocaust? And I'm going to take a couple of responses. How many people were murdered? I heard a few people say 6 million. 12 million. Good. You're both right. So 6 million Jews were murdered, and around 11 or 12 people in total were murdered and targeted. And I think it's really important to talk about that. So 6 million Jewish people were murdered, but who were all the other people? These are all people targeted by the Nazis. Up to 250,000 people with disabilities living in institutions were murdered. Did you know that? Disabled people, many of them were on the autism spectrum. 250,000 to 500,000 Romani people were murdered. An unknown number of homosexual people were murdered. And also targeted and murdered were Freemasons, Jehovah's Witnesses, political prisoners, Serbs, and Slovenes. And then add to that the 3 million Soviet prisoners of war and 1.8 million non-Jewish Polish civilians. It is so important, always, but it feels even more so now, for us to think about this. If we aren't the ones, whoever we are, if we aren't the ones to stand up and speak up for others, who will speak up for us? We might not care very much about Romani people. We might not know anything about Romani people, but we need to speak up for them if somebody is coming after them. At some point, my Oma learns of all the relatives and friends of her own that were killed, and these are just the closest of her relatives that I could fit on a slide. And you'll see at the top of the list, I consider her mother a victim of the Holocaust, her husband Moritz, her brother Kurt, and on the bottom of the list you'll see Harry Slaughter, the cousin who helped us, and his young son Max, who was murdered at the age of 7 toward the end of the war. He's my second cousin, right? Everybody knows they're second cousins, right? He's my second cousin. In 1947, my Oma and Dad pack up their crate labeled for Riverside Drive in New York City. Some of you may know it. And they take the ship called the Marine Falcon to America. They build a life here in America. My Oma marries again, and my father works hard. Well, he plays hard. He works hard. He marries Margie, my mom, and he lives the American dream for my brother and me. My dad had only an 8th grade education himself, yet my parents were able to send my brother and me to college. Now, a lot of people ask me, what happened to Bocholt in the war? What happened to your family's property? So just briefly, I will show you. The downtown area of Bocholt was badly bombed out in March of 1945, right at the very end of the war. It was badly bombed out. And one of the reasons it was bombed out was there was an industry there named Flinders, which we might know of as Siemens, which produced things for the war machine. So targets weren't so accurate, so they bombed the downtown area. And apparently, my family's former store was also badly damaged, since it was also badly damaged, and it has since been rebuilt by the family that obtained it in 1938 or 39 and Aryanized it, which means they obtained it for a very cheap price. And while I haven't shared much about my own journey here, mostly trying to focus on my father's journey, one transformational moment for me in a very positive way was when I, with my brother on the right, met Johann and Nina, his sister, which is the descendants of the people who Aryanized my family's store. They still own the store, and Johann lives upstairs in the store. And there's a series of meetings we had that were transformational to me. So I just wanted to mention that. That's what has become of Bocholt and our family's store. So today, I wanted to focus on my family's survival story and the upstanders, right? Those who found within themselves the spark to act and to do so with courage, with compassion, and with kindness. And I would like to bring them fully into the room with us, even some of those I haven't told you about today, because for some of them, there's no one left to remember them. So I'm going to read their names aloud. Feel free to say them with me if you like. Mr. and Mrs. Imping, the limousine driver, Jan Duking, the local police, the Henringen Mayor Beaumont, families Kussel and Speer, Queen Wilhelmina, Harry and his wife Hilda Slager, Zig Menko, Bernard Sanders, Reverend Leendert Overdown, Jan Lansink, Gerhard Lansink and Mina Lansink, and the resistance, including the tall policeman. So in closing, I appeal to you today as a testament to the 6 million Jewish people who perished and to the 6 million more who perished, and to the numerous righteous Gentiles. Please allow your own spark to shine. Don't simply stand by and watch when someone near or far is in need. I ask you to stand up when they're in need. I ask you, please, to speak out against bullies and autocrats, against dictators and terrorists and hate mongers. And I ask you to perform even the smallest additional acts of curiosity, of caring, and of kindness to help make our world a better place. Thank you. So we have a few minutes for questions, and then we will break for dessert and book signings.
All your photographs that you had, but the family, did they take them from Holland to Germany?
Okay, so the documents.
All in hiding.
Okay, so the documents that they had, how did they take them? So this is a really good question. I don't think they had much that they took from Germany to Holland when they ran across the border. But remember I said you can ask me about this later? They got their furniture and things. Do you remember I said that? It was sent to them. I learned this from the archives in Munster after going through 800 pages of documents related to my family's home. What I learned was that there was an addendum to the sale agreement that Arianized my family's store. And that addendum required the new owner of the store to ship furniture, silverware, linens, everything. And I assume the documents and photographs were in that. So that's how they got to Holland. How did they get into hiding? How did they survive? I have no idea. I have no idea. I could make guesses, but I don't really know. That's one of those many things that I just don't know the answers to, and it's really hard not knowing, but that's life, right? Thank you for that question. Up here, Lou.
First of all, I want to thank you so much for this presentation. It made it personal for me, and I'm sure everybody else. Question that I have, we all have a personal, well, I speak for myself. I have a personal connection with some of the things you were talking about. I'm not a young man anymore. How can I, in your opinion, this didn't happen 1,000 years ago. This happened in our parents' lifetime. How, in your opinion, how can we make that connection for future generations?
So how can we make that connection for future generations, you just said? That's challenging because the third generation, the fourth generation are more distanced, and so they're not as interested, they're not as impacted by it. So I don't know the answer to that. That's something a lot of people are asking. But one of the things that's important is to speak to young children. So I speak, not to young children, but I speak to high school and middle school children in schools. So making that connection with kids I don't know is important. Also, you know, my older son came with me on all 4 trips I went on. And so he's in the story, you know, he's fully engaged. But my younger son wasn't so interested until this trip we went on very recently. So, you know, he was interested, he came, and I don't know what he's going to do with that. So I think what we have to do is know all we can about the stories, write them down, record them on video, whatever works for you, and make sure that they're available so that maybe one day they will be interested. When they are our age, maybe they'll be interested. And then they'll be sad, like I am, that they didn't ask you those questions when you were still around. You know, I'm really sad that I didn't ask my dad questions. So that's the best we can do, I think. So thank you for asking.
To add to what you and the gentleman said, first, I give you brownie points. I have never seen my mother show a tape in full. I have never seen Schindler's List in full. Both my parents were survivors. So I give you a lot of credit for doing this. What we did, my niece's kids and my nephew's kids. My niece's kids go to Ramaz in Manhattan. It's an yeshiva. The yeshiva now has my mother's show a tape. All the pictures that we found, the school has copies of it. Every place we can, forgive my expression, dump a copy of something, whether, thank you, Bill, for the taping for me, I appreciate it. Any place we can leave a show a copy or pictures. Right. I have my parents' marriage certificate.
Yeah.
The
yes,
strange things you find,
right.
You hand them off to another
There
child.
are archives available for that purpose,
Yes.
right. So I did a lot of research. By the way, I didn't watch Holocaust movies most of my life. But now suddenly when I'm doing this research, I'm reading every Holocaust book I can get my hands on. It's kind of sick, but like I have to now, but I couldn't do that before. But yes, there are archives in places. If you're German, of German descent, the Leo Baeck Institute is a great place. Or the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, they will take archives, original archives of things too. So that's a place you can deposit them and hope that one day your kids will want to find them. And you can come talk to me some more up front afterwards. Thank you all.
Thank you for a very moving presentation. Thank you. Just talk a little bit about next month's program. On Thursday, May 22nd, Carol Brown, the president of the Travel Club, will be here to do a multimedia presentation on all the wonderful, exciting trips they took locally and around the world. And what is coming up next for anyone who might be interested in the Travel Club. And now we're just going to have the 50-50, and then dessert, you're more than welcome to help yourselves. But in the meantime, while you're doing that, Irene will be available at the table if you'd like to purchase a book, if you'd like to just ask the questions. Again, thank you again so much, Irene.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.